Go ahead, torticolis.
Torticolis is a condition that could be not only congenital, not in the sense that it's like a birth, like a genetic problem. It's not a hereditary thing. It's congenital in the sense that babies are often born with it or they develop it after birth. But it can also be something that adults get. And what really happens is that you get a tightening, or what they actually call a pseudotumor. It's not a tumor, but it's like a real focal muscle spasm in the belly of this muscle that starts from behind the ear, called the mastoid process, and the muscle runs down into the area where the clavicle is. It's called the SCM, the sternocleidomastoid muscle. What happens in utero, oftentimes because of positioning in utero, the baby's head and neck is in a certain position, or again, the birth process can be traumatic. And most of the time, torticolis is associated with misalignments in the top two vertebrae. But what happens is when this muscle gets tight, it constantly pulls on the bone here. And remember what we said, the skull of an infant is not fused. So when this continues to happen over time, it starts to change the shape of the skull. When the skull starts to change its shape, it's called plagiocephaly. So torticolis basically is when you see an infant or a newborn or a toddler even, and their head sometimes tilts to the same side, or maybe their head doesn't tilt this way, but it kind of rotates this way quite often. When I have patients come in, even if they're not my patients yet, but they're moms that are coming in postpartum and they have the baby in the car seat, one of the first things I do is I just glance over at the baby. And even yesterday I had a newborn come in and I said to the mom, does the baby always keep their head turned to the left? And she's like, yeah, actually she does. So we started working on torticolis. So it's something that can easily be taken care of, but what happens often is that pediatricians either they don't pick it up because they don't see the child that often, or they tell the parent, no, don't worry about it, it's kind of like they'll outgrow it, which they often do with scoliosis, which you never outgrow. But you can do a lot to take care of this problem so that you get the head and neck straight, and it doesn't take, it doesn't put the force in the cranium. When babies come in and they have that cranial misalignment, we do the cranial sacral work. And that's a gentle way of getting those bones to change and to reposition themselves. Unlike the helmet, where if you see babies in helmets, they have the helmet on because their head is now misshapen, probably because of the result of a torticolis, which was never diagnosed and treated correctly. All right? Well, see, that all started with the Back to Sleep campaign. And now you have kids that have completely flat heads because the parents are always putting them on their, on their backs. If your child has normal range of motion in the neck, which we check, there's no reason why they can't do tummy time. There's no reason why you can't sleep them on their side. They should be like a rotisserie all day long. You should be rotating them so that they don't develop those problems. But certainly, if you have a child that has a flatness, maybe not because of torticolis, but because they're usually laying in a certain position, there are things that you need to do to change the way their head is positioned. There are exercises that you can do to try to stretch out muscles that may now be contracted, which tend to lead them to that position. So all of those things, if you take care of them proactively, you don't have to be reactive and say, oh my God, now my kid needs a helmet. Which, by the way, is really a very forceful way of trying to jam those bones back into a symmetric position. And who's thinking about the underlying development of the brain? You're putting when you're compressing the skull, you're affecting the brain. And one of the things I'm wondering is whether anybody is doing research on these kids that have helmets, and do they have a higher incidence of learning disabilities, or what's going on with these kids long term?